Now, to me, this is the story of the day, the story of the last couple of days here in the transfer portal, and that is Notre Dame and what's going on with their offensive line room. Just played in the national championship. We've mentioned how with the playoffs, these teams have a few days here buffer to enter, and man, you are now, if you're a Notre Dame fan, losing 3 guys in the last 24 hours plus here that were big parts of your offensive line. You're going into next season playing Miami early in the year, right? So you're going to be playing a team that, as you know, we understand Miami is going to be a top 20 type team consensus by most people's estimate. And you're going to have what looks like a completely different offensive line. And we'll get into each of these guys individually. There was a good amount of shuffling on this line in terms of guys beating each other out and, coming back and taking jobs from different people. But again, 3 guys here in Pat Coogan, center, Rocco, Spindler, and then yesterday, Sam Pendleton, who's now getting crystal balls to Tennessee.
Yeah, so it's like musical chairs with this offensive line in a lot of ways. First of all, one of the most talented, deep offensive lines in the country. You saw that this year with all the injuries they had and still being able to field a strong unit that was really central to what they did on offense. But what you saw here, again, I mentioned musical chairs. There's 5 spots, right? So starting with a guy like Sam Pendleton, who we talked about yesterday, right? Sam Pendleton entered the portal. He's now being projected to go to Tennessee. Pendleton won the guard job in camp. That was a little bit unexpected. And that ended up moving Pat Coogan, who was the previous starter at guard, to center. Initially a backup. He ended up starting. We'll talk about that in a second. Rocco Spindler did not start, was behind Billy Schroth, and then came and took that spot when Billy Schroth hurt his ankle. So there was a lot of movement here, and all these pieces sort of affected each other. What you're seeing consistently with Pendleton, who, again, we talked about him yesterday, he's now projected to go to Tennessee. Rocco Spindler, starting offensive guard, really tough player. We'll get into him in a second. And Pat Coogan, the center, is that all 3 of those guys were not guaranteed starters, but started a lot of games. With Pendleton, he started off as a starter and then was taken out of the starting lineup. With Spindler and with Coogan, they were initially beaten out and then eventually got back in the lineup because of injuries and stayed there. So that's all that. That's why when I say musical chairs, I mean all these guys were moving around. Notre Dame's offensive line incredibly deep. But all 3 of these players, we talked about Pendleton yesterday, powerful knockback power. I think he fits well at Tennessee if that is where he ends up. All these guys to me are high major priority portal targets. This is January 23rd, and you can potentially get a playoff caliber offensive lineman with experience and toughness and coaching to plug right into your lineup. There is going to be a long list of teams trying to get these players. Let's start with Rocco Spindler, 6'5", 325 pounds, from Detroit, Michigan. He was the number 660 overall player in the 247 composite class of 2021. Wrestling background. His father, Mark, was a top recruit in the country, played for Pittsburgh Panthers, 3rd-round pick of the Detroit Lions. That's why Spindler's from Detroit. Played 9 years in the NFL. Spindler's got a lot of experience, redshirt senior next year, played all 16 games this year for the Irish, started 13 of them. Like we mentioned, he finished as a starter, played every snap of the win over Georgia, for example. So when, like I mentioned, he lost his job in camp. Billy Schroth gets hurt. Spindler steps in, and then when Schroth came back to play, he actually took Pendleton's job, who is now transferring potentially to Tennessee. So that's how the whole thing shuffled. You wonder, why is Spindler going into the portal as a returning starter? You got Charles Jagasaw, who played a little tackle this year. Really exciting prospect for Notre Dame. A lot of people think he could be a big-time NFL kind of guy, particularly if he moves inside. You could see him going inside. Gerby Lambert, a guy who's very talented outside of tackle, a young player. Maybe he stays out there. Anthony Knapp, who played tackle during this playoff run. Could he potentially land on the inside for his future, another young player? So there's a lot of really talented young guys, which is why Spindler's spot was not guaranteed. But I watched him against Louisville, really focus on that tape this morning or once he entered the portal. Right guard, brawler, Very, very good in a phone booth. Sometimes he loses his balance, but when he's engaged, he has that wrestling background. He has that size. He'll wrestle you down. He'll probably open the hole. He can pull a little bit as well, but it's not someone that I would say is overly athletic. This guy is your definition of a brawler, 6'5", 325. He's going to have a long, long list of suitors. One team that's been linked to him, just kind of speculation, Michigan. They were a contender for him out of high school. He's from Detroit. Michigan's always looking to add to their offensive line room. That's a potential fit there. The other big name, Pat Coogan. This is a starting center for Notre Dame. 6'5", 310 from Chicago, 3-star out of the class of 2021. Lost his starting job to Ashton Craig. There's a Coogan start. Sorry, Coogan started at guard, right, last year. Loses his starting job to Pendleton, like I mentioned. Moves to center, backs up Ashton Craig. Ashton Craig gets hurt. Coogan gets in the starting lineup and is a really, really good year. Some people have called him the heartbeat of the offensive line. He was a leader. He had a famous phrase of 4 quarters of FU football, which he would say. His pregame speeches became pretty legendary. 8 pressures throughout the season, only 1 sack, 79 pass blocking grade. That's second on the team behind Shrouth. Was able to get to the second level at times. I watched him again against Louisville. Great size and length at the center position because he is previously a starting guard for Notre Dame, so he's bigger than your average center. Can get to the second level. Just really a physically gifted center prospect, not a first round type physically gifted, but somebody that brings some size and looks the part coming off the bus at that position. Teams that I think are going to be lining up for these guys. I mentioned Michigan earlier when it comes to Spindler because of the location and the relationship there. I got to think, if I'm Oklahoma or if I'm USC and I'm protecting my quarterback that I'm building around, whether it's Mayava for USC or John Mateer for Oklahoma, they need experienced, high-quality offensive linemen. USC lost 2 really, really good ones to the portal. Manuel Pregna, Mason Murphy out the door. They needed those guys. They weren't even that good last year as a unit, so they need to get better. Oklahoma, one of the worst offensive lines in the country. They've signed some young players. They need more. Those are 2 teams. This is hypothetical that I'd be, if I'm those 2 teams, I am putting a huge premium on either of these 2 guys to come in and bring some championship-level experience and quality to that room.
Yeah, you saw that tweet that I just had up there from Pete Sampson saying that Coogan, whether he started or not, would have been a captain most likely on this team next season. So you can't imagine that Marcus Freeman is too happy about these losses. I mean, I said it the other day that I didn't think that they'd lose too many guys here, but I was wrong on this part. And again, it's a very deep room, right? So I know there's going to be some Notre Dame fans that pop in here in the comments section that say, look, we're not concerned about it. But it is just something to watch because they played so much football, and that depth is kind of what made them be able to do what they did, because a lot of these guys stepped up in situations where guys were hurt and things of that nature. But you lose 3 of them that played a lot of football, and you got to replace them now and bring in guys who haven't played as much football who are going to be backing them up. And just as we're on here as well, another one entered the portal, reserve lineman Ty Chan. So he was a big recruit in the 2022 class. So he was more of a reserve guy, was a deep reserve, so wasn't even in the 2 deep this year. But another guy there from the offensive line gone.
Yeah, that's a good opportunity for maybe, what about like a UNLV, who we talk about a lot on the show. We got Sergeant Mayhew in the chat, so I know he's always focused on UNLV. A team like that, I could see taking a chance on a Ty Chan just because that body type, the fact that he's been coached so well. He's a class of 22 kid, so he has experience, maybe not in games, but he's an older player. I can see him maybe going to the G5 level and finding a role there, but he could also maybe get opportunities at the P4. This is a position, whether it's guard or tackle, that he ultimately suits up at, that you're always looking for help there. They're always going to find a spot for somebody with this body type, this pedigree. He's played in games, mostly on special teams, but still somebody who's played in games. I could see him being somebody that gets a nice little bounce back. UNLV.
He's a Massachusetts kid, so it's it's across the country. Maybe a BC,
Boston College, yeah.
BC with Bill O'Brien. They've been trying to rebuild the trenches there as well. We understand the sort of football they want to play, so maybe that's the move. But I'm sure UNLV would be very interested.
But look, Ashton, if you're Notre Dame, these are not good developments because these are players that are good players that helped you with depth. As you mentioned, Pete, depth got Notre Dame to this point. If they didn't have the offensive line depth that they had with all the injuries they had, they never would have been playing for a championship. But these are not guaranteed starters by any means. Again, you think about Billy Schrauth, who went down. When he came back, he walked right into the starting lineup. Think of Anthony Knapp. You think about Charles Jagasaw, who, like I mentioned, is considered a rising star. Gerby Lambert, really, really talented tackle. Ashton Craig was the starting center, so he'll slide right back into that starting center spot. Probably would have beaten out Coogan anyways, based on their prior battle. So not like a total nightmare for Notre Dame here, but it's never good to lose quality players with experience. This is going to really set the portal market, I think, on fire for the next couple of days, because these type of players are at a premium, and pretty much any team in the country that's not Notre Dame with their depth is going to spend big to get this kind of guys.
Well, and there's probably some coaches, some offensive line coaches across the country who are looking at these guys and saying, man, I thought I was good at guard or center here, and then these guys popped up and said, man, but this guy would be an upgrade over what I have right now, and it kind of throws a wrench into things a bit there. But
yeah, and you King God's asking, does Miami reach out to one of them for the left guard position and compete with McCoy? It's a very interesting question. I mean, McCoy is very highly regarded internally. Matthew McCoy at Miami, they think he's an NFL type player, but I mean, you can never have enough offensive linemen. The question I had when I saw this was, if Coogan was on the market earlier, would Miami knock on after James Brockermeyer? But there's going to be a lot of teams in this mix. And again, the teams that really, really jump out to me are, this is no information. This is just who needs these kind of guys. Oklahoma, trying to rebuild the worst offensive line in the SEC, which is crazy to say about a team like Oklahoma, but that's where they were last year. You can't just rely on the young guys, the Michael Fasusis of the world. You recruited great. You need veterans. I can see Oklahoma getting involved here, and USC. You've invested a lot in Jaden Mayaba. You got one of the best young quarterbacks as far as high school in the country in Hussein Longstreet. You got to play offensive line better than you did last year, especially if you want to throw it down the field. Both of these guys would really, really help either of those programs.
And look, I last thing on this, but I said it before, they go on the road to Miami week 1. So you're going to have a whole new communication, thing going on there with all the new faces. And look, there's going to be a lot of offensive lines across the country that deal with the same thing week 1. It's not a Notre Dame specific issue. We know that there's going to be talent there, but again, we'll see how it all meshes early on.